Hey everybody, BlendMaster here with another tutorial, and today I'm going to be showing you guys how to create this cool abstract fluid image inside of Blender. And this isn't that hard to do. We'll be creating a simple particle system, and then we'll be using metaballs as the objects for our particles to create these really cool fluid abstract images. And I'll also be going over how to create these materials here and how to get that blurred out background as well inside the compositor. So let's jump into Blender and get started. So the first thing we want to do is create a particle system, and with this cube selected I'm just going to come over to the settings here, click new, and if we press Alt A we can sort of see what our particles are doing right now. You can see that they're falling all the way to the ground, which is not what I want. So I'm going to come over down to the field weight settings over here and change gravity to 0. So if we restart this animation you can see that the particles are sort of going out now. And I'm also going to increase the number to something like 50,000. And you can see that since this is a cube and they're emitting from the faces, it's emitting straight up and it's not really spherical. So what we're going to do instead, I'm going to pause the animation. With the cube selected, I'm going to come over to the modifier tab, add in a subsurf modifier and set it to 2, and then just apply it real quick. And now if we restart this animation, you can see that it's a lot smoother and it's going out in different angles, looking a lot more like a sphere. And one other thing I want to fix is you can see that these sort of have a initial velocity and they're flying away from our sphere, which isn't what we want. So if we come to the particle settings here, we can come down to velocity, and under emitter geometry we'll set the normal to 0. And now you can see that if we start the animation, the particles are sort of just appearing here and then dying off after about 50 frames. But I want the particles to last for a really long time, so I'm going to increase that to about 500. And then I'll also increase this random value to about 0.25. And I want more of these particles to appear early on, so I'm going to set the end frame to 100. Like that, so no more particles are being added after frame 100, and all 50,000 are added between 1 and 100. So that's looking pretty good. Now what we need to do is add in some force fields to affect our particles. So I'm going to press Shift A, come down to force field, and I'm going to add in turbulence. If we just go to front view orthographic mode and press Alt A, you can sort of see that the effect this force field is having on our particles here. And if we go to the settings here, we can play around with these values. I'm going to set the strength maybe to 5. You can see that it's a lot stronger and faster. I'll increase the size to maybe 1. We can see what that looks like. And if we increase this flow value, you'll notice that these particles start out to follow these curves and flow together more like a fluid, which is sort of the effect that we want. So I think that looks pretty good. I'm going to leave those settings here, and then I think frame 125 is a good looking frame for this. I'm going to go to front view again, and for these particles we want each particle to be a separate metaball object. So let's add in the metaball, and I'm just going to drag it to the side over here, and with our cube selected, let's go to the particle settings here and switch it from halo to object, and then just select our metaball. And right now you can see that it looks really weird, and that's because this metaball is scaled up too big. So you just want to select that, and I'm going to scale it down by 0.1 and then press enter. And then we'll select our cube again, and in the particle settings we're going to increase the size to something like 0.5. And that's looking pretty good. So if you wanted, you can play around with this random size. I think I'm just going to leave it at 0. And you can also, if you click this metaball here, you can come over to the metaball settings, and if you change this resolution to 0.2, it'll actually increase the detail in our metaballs. So I'm going to do that. And now what we can do is we can press Alt-C, and it'll bring up this conversion menu, and we can convert it to a mesh. like that. And now we can just move this to another layer, and you can see that it's an actual mesh now, and we still have our particle system on our original cube here. So now what I want to do is create a second one with this particle system, and what I'm going to do instead is just go to wireframe mode and select this force field. I'm going to press R twice to bring up this trackball rotation, and just keep randomly rotating this until we get something different. And I'm also going to change the seed value for this so we get a different variation of the turbulence. And we can press Alt A again to play this particle system. And I'm going to stop it at frame 125 again. So right about now. And then I'm just going to add in a new metaball object. Just move it over. I'm going to scale it down by 0.1. And with our particle system selected, come over here. We can just click our metaball object again like we did before. Then I'll just, with the metaball object, decrease this value so that we actually double the resolution. And then we can press Alt C again to convert it to a mesh. So now that it's done converting, we can move this to the third layer, and we can actually get rid of our particle system because we don't need it anymore. And I'll also delete our field, our force field, and our lamp. I'm also going to save our file right now. So let's create a new folder. Let's call it Abstract Fluid. And let's just call it Abstract Fluid. Okay, and now if we go to our second layer here, we can select our metaball, tab into edit mode, and I'm going to just select this metaball way over here, one vertice, and if we press Ctrl L, it'll select all the connected vertices as well, and we can press X to delete that entire sphere that's just hanging out over there. Then we can tab back out and press Control Shift Alt C to bring up this menu here and set the origin to the geometry. And then we're going to do the exact same thing with this second mesh object here. So let's just tab into edit mode, select one vertex of this sphere here, Control L to select the whole object, and then X to delete, and tab out of edit mode, and then Control Shift and Alt C and origin to geometry. So if we look at this real quick, you can see that it's really bumpy over here, and to get rid of that, what we're going to do is just go into Sculpt mode, and we want to change the brush to smooth. I'm just going to leave the strength as it is, and I'm going to increase the radius by pressing F and then just dragging this up. And you can adjust it to whatever you want, and then just start sculpting away all of these bumps on our object. So I'm going to speed this portion of the tutorial up, and I'll come back when I'm done. Alright, so I'm done smoothing out both of these objects here, and you can notice that there's a lot of these excess bubbles just hanging outside of our main fluid object. So to get rid of that, you can either tab into edit mode and then just delete all of these single bubbles, Or what you could do is select one of these vertices here and press Ctrl L on the big object and hide that. And then we can just choose all of these big blobs that we want to keep and a couple of these random smaller ones. So that way we can hide the rest of those. And then we can delete whatever we have left. So I'm just selecting at least one vertex from the big objects and then a couple of these small ones from random places. You want to make sure you look everywhere for these. Okay, I think that's good. Let's press Ctrl L. Maybe want to add a couple from here, like that. But I think that looks pretty good. If you want, you can also use the circle select to get a few of these. But the main idea is to get only a couple, and then press Ctrl L to make sure the whole object is selected, H to hide it, and then we can just press A to select everything that's left, and X to delete. Now we can press Alt H to unhide the rest of our paint splash. And if we take a look now, you can see it's a lot more cleaned up, and that looks a lot better. So I'm going to do the same thing with this one over here. Just select it, tab into edit mode, and select one of the vertices from the main fluid, Ctrl L, and then hide that. And then just select whatever you want to keep from here. So I'm probably going to use circle select because I think that's a little bit faster to get these clumps. And yeah, that's pretty much it. Let's see. I think that looks pretty good. So I'll press Ctrl L to hide that, or to select everything, H to hide. Then we can select all of this and X to delete. Then unhide everything with Alt H and tab back out of edit mode, and yep, that looks a lot better. So now what we can do is just move this object to the second layer with our other fluid object, and you can see that it's starting to look pretty cool, like a fluid splash or something. I'm just going to scale this one up a little bit like that. And if you wanted, you can rotate these around or whatever you like. I think I'm going to keep it like that, not move it around too much. But now what we need to do is set up our lighting. So I'm going to switch over to the Cycles engine and press Shift A to add in a plane. Let's press R and X to rotate it by 90 degrees. Go to side view and just move it back right here, and then scale it up by 5. And we'll give this a new material, call it light. It's going to be an emission shader with a pure white color. And I'm going to set the strength to about 2.5. And then I'll duplicate this plane as well and rotate it a bit like that. And let's go to top view and rotate a little bit to this side. And I think that looks good. And then we'll press Shift D to duplicate it one last time, Alt G and Alt R. We're going to scale it by 0.5 so it's half that size. And just move it down to over here and face it towards the bottom so we get some of that lighting underneath. And this one I'm going to create a new material and set the strength to about 1. So now if we go to rendered mode, you'll notice that we actually have the planes showing up in our render, which is not what we want. So let's come over to the Object Info tab over here, and under Cycle Settings, we'll uncheck Camera from Ray Visibility. We'll do that for each of these planes here, so that they don't render in our camera view. I'm also going to go over to the World tab, check Use Nodes, and set the backdrop to black. And I'm also going to make the background transparent and check Border here. And let's add in our camera. Press Ctrl 0 to make it the active camera. And just zoom out to wherever we want. I think that looks pretty good. I'm actually going to zoom in maybe a little bit here and get it sort of like a corner piece of it. Something like that, maybe. Whoops. I think that looks pretty cool. And if you want, you can rotate the camera around, get something different like that. And then what you want to do is just select one of these. We'll open up a new window here and switch over to the node editor. I'm going to check new, and I'll press N to get rid of this tab here. And then let's just drag this out. And if you have the Node Wrangler add-on enabled, you'll notice that if you add in another shader and you want to mix the two, if you hold down Alt and then right click and drag, it'll automatically add in a mixed shader. I just found that out and thought it was pretty cool, and I wanted to share that. But what I'm going to do here, set the roughness down to 0 and set this to a pure black color. And let's add in a Fresnel node. Like that. I think that looks pretty good. And then we'll select the opposite fluid object, and let's give it that same material, and then press this 2 button here to make it different. And we're going to delete this diffuse shader, and instead we're going to add in a translucent shader. So let's plug that in. And I'm going to add in a RGB node to control the color. And right in between that, I'm going to add in a hue saturation value node and boost the value to about 1.25. So now we can play around and pick whatever kind of color we want. A lot of these look pretty cool with the nice glossy black. One thing you might want to do though is increase this roughness to about 0.2, so it's a little bit smoother than the glossy black fluid. But I think this looks pretty cool. I think I'm going to do maybe a greenish color, something like that. Light green yellow. I think that looks pretty cool. Maybe a little bit more yellowish. Something like there looks pretty good. So now that I have my frame set up for what I want, you can also switch the materials between the two objects and see which way you like it, if you like it this way better. And I think that looks pretty cool. I might play around with the camera rotation a little bit more. Maybe zoom in a bit or rotate it. Something like that. Zoom in. I think that looks pretty cool. So I think that's good for a camera positioning for now. What I'm going to do now is add in another camera. Let's press Ctrl 0 to make that the new active camera. And we just want to zoom in on a close spot here and just get a lot of color variation in our render. So let's see. Just bring up the trackball rotation, just move your camera wherever you want. And you just want to try to get something completely random. So I think something like this will work. Just move it some more. Maybe something right about here. Zoom out a little bit. I think that looks pretty good. And now what I want to do is add some depth of field so we can really blur this out and make it a background for our final image. And to get the empty right where we want it, since we have the camera selected, we can press Shift S and bring the cursor to selected. And then if we add in our empty right now, it will be added right to the center of our camera. And then I'm just going to go to top view and drag it into the center of wherever our camera is, right there. And then if we go back to our camera view, we can select our camera, go to the camera settings here, and under focus select that one empty, and then just increase this radius size to 0.1. And whoops, we need to make sure empty is selected. And I think that looks pretty good. So I'm just going to come over to the render settings here. increase the samples to about 200, and then make sure that denoising is checked off. We'll just render this background image and save it for later. So I'm going to pause the recording now, and I'll come back when it's done rendering. Alright, so now that it's done rendering, we can just save this as, F3 to save it as our background. And then we'll click our other camera, press Ctrl and 0 on the numpad to switch to that view. And I'm going to do the same thing we did last time with the empty for the depth of field, and press Shift S to bring the cursor to the selected, and then we'll press Shift A to add in an empty. Then from top view, I'm just going to drag it out to right about there so that it's focused on one of these points. And from side view, I'm just going to adjust it to make sure that it's right where I want it. And then just look and see. So I actually want it right about there. So let's see how that looks. And I think that's pretty good. So let's go back to our camera view and see that. And that looks pretty good. So now I can come over to the camera settings again, and we're going to make sure that the correct empty object selected for our focus. And then we'll go to rendered view, and I'm just going to increase the size to maybe 0.15. And that might be a little bit too strong, so I'm going to switch it to 0.1. And I think that's pretty good. Let's see. I think maybe something like 0.05 might be a little bit better. So it's just not as strong, and we still have a lot of our image in focus. So I think that looks pretty good. I'm just going to render this out. I'll pause the recording again, and I'll come back when it's done rendering. Alright, so now that it's done rendering, we can jump over to the compositor. So let's click that. I'm going to make sure use nodes and backdrop are checked, and we'll press Ctrl up arrow to go to full screen mode, and we'll press N to get rid of this tab here. And since we have the Node Wrangler add-on, we can press Ctrl Shift and left click on this render layer node to bring up the viewer node and see our image in the background as we continue to edit it. So now I'm just going to duplicate this render layer node by pressing Shift D and then Shift S, so that we can switch it to an image node and bring in that background which we created earlier. And then we'll just add in this alpha over node. Let's plug our background image into the bottom socket, and I'm gonna change the color to black so that we can get rid of any transparency that was in our image before. And we'll just duplicate this again and plug in our render layer into the bottom socket this time. And you can see that there's still some grain from our background image, so to get rid of that we can just add in a blur node, switch it to fast Gaussian, and change it to something like 10 by 10. So I think that looks pretty good, maybe 15 by 15. Yeah, I think that looks good. So now what I'm going to do is just add in this cinematic node group, which I created in a previous tutorial. If you want to learn how to create it, I'll put a link to the tutorial in the description below. But I'm just going to decrease this value to about 0.5. And basically what it's doing is just making those colors a lot more vivid. And one thing you might want to do is add in a color mix node in between here, and set the factor to 0.5 and just clamp it so that we don't get any weird artifacts from values that are greater than 1 within this image. And yeah, that's pretty much it for creating that abstract fluid wallpaper. We can just plug this into the composite node now. And if we go back to our node editor, we can press Ctrl Shift and left click so that it refreshes here. And we can just save this as our abstract fluid image. And yeah, that's pretty much it for this tutorial, guys. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed and learned something new. If you have any suggestions for future tutorials, feel free to leave them in the comments below. As always, thanks for watching.